I think we're getting most of the registers. Juan, are we pretty much ready to go? Yeah. Okay. So we're gonna go. Are we gonna go at the three? Okay. So we're just gonna. Our technical team is telling us to just wait a little bit more time before we get started. So I really appreciate everybody's patience and us getting started. We're just waiting for everybody else to log in. All right. Well, I just want to welcome everybody today for joining this wonderful opportunity for us to take advantage of. This webinar was put together by the team of Capital Direct Funding and, of course, our family business. And, of course, we have invited a wonderful guest speaker with a tremendous amount of knowledge that's going to be a benefit. So we really want to thank everybody for pre-registering. And, of course, this information is going to be out, so we'd like to definitely welcome everybody again and say thank you for participating. We are proud that we're putting on this event because we really believe that this is going to be something that can help you and your clients. So learn how ADUs will create value for you and your clients. And we're specifically going to be tying in to the 2020 updated rules. So let's go ahead and get started by introducing our guest, Daniel Aguilar. Daniel Aguilar is the owner of Alternative Design, and with his experience, he studied at USC. That is, yes, he is a Trojan, and he's studied all over the world. And we bring a tremendous amount of experience to our table. So, Daniel, welcome.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you for the introduction. I'm really happy to be here. Just to talk a little bit about my experience, I worked for a number of offices in Los Angeles and abroad, in Berlin and Mexico City and Asia. And I worked in Los Angeles in multiple projects in regards to ADUs, in specifics to the Woolsey Fire rebuilds. I also have worked on in prefabricated world, so I have some understanding. I have understanding about that, and I'm currently working on another office in Los Angeles in that's specific in high end and commercial residential, and I'm really passionate to be here. I'm really interested of the future LA and what the ADU is going to bring to the table.
Excellent. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for being here. And again, for those that I've not had the pleasure of introducing or knowing myself personally, my name is Frank Williams, co-founder of Capital Direct Funding. Our family business started many years ago. We're on our 12th year as Capital Direct Funding. I just broke the 30-year mark with my career. And of course, our family business has really been a blessing. So I'm a housing advocate, especially with regards to creating wealth through home ownership. So I just want to let you know that we're excited for all of you to be here. And it's like anything else. We are here to create value for you. So hopefully we want to walk through, let's go through the slides on showing us exactly what we're doing so that way you know how we're keeping to our time. So the first thing is this is an overview of what we're going to be talking today. So we're going to go through the basics of what's an ADU, the new legislation, popularity, the impact on the asset, the hurdles that you can encounter, and of course, fair housing aspects, utilizing private money programs to get your project financed. And of course, we have a dedicated time for Q&A and of course, our closing remarks. So go ahead and let's get started because we want to go ahead and bring in Daniel. And Daniel, what is an ADU? So let's go ahead and go through that.
So an ADU is a secondary dwelling unit. Basically, there, as you see from the slides, it comes from a form of ground up construction, conversion, and it all has to do with addition to the primary unit. This is, of course, has come as a result from the high needs and housing prices that we have in whole California. So this is a very interesting new model, and it's still very, even though it was created in 2017 as a state legislation, he has gone through a lot of progress. So
We've come a lot. We've come a long way with regards to accessory dwelling units. That's why we just go ADU. So it's just like incredible with all the different formations that you saw on that last slide on all the different aspects and alternatives that you have. But it's really to create housing. Is that not right?
Completely. I mean, we definitely are low in stock of housing, and this is another alternative to coming up with more units. And the state has relaxed a lot the rules in order to facilitate the production of housing. And taking, because the single family housing has been the model for such a long time. So there's this new model in trying to densify a little the suburban areas of.
A lot of it had to do with the zonings because the zonings wouldn't even allow you to do this.
Correct.
The cities would really kind of block all that. Those type of opportunities of creating additional housing.
Correct. Especially in cities, the issue with single family housing has always been the parking regulations and not being able to expand or build because of parking, right? And the state has definitely come a long ways in that capacity. So I can speak a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, I know we're going to get into that a little bit later, especially with the fair housing aspects. If you look at the setbacks and you deal with that, I know we're going to get through that a little bit later in our meeting, in our webcast. But one of the aspects that really created all these opportunities, like you had mentioned, the original legislation in 2016 that got that put in place in 2017, and all the different evolutions. But really, what we're here today is about the 2020 updates. Right. So let's go ahead and go back to the slide and prepare about the new legislation that came to play on why we're talking about ADUs today. So go ahead, Daniel.
Yes, absolutely. So just to speak a little bit about the previous legislation, which was enacted in 2017, was that, again, single family housing was able to create or construct the additional accessory dwelling unit. This from the state, you were able to build up to not exceeding 1,200 square feet, and if being attached, it wouldn't be able to max the 50% of the size of the home. The parking was also, again, like one of the things that we have been able to see how it's moving away from the requirements, which has enabled the new laws. Let's talk about AB 68. Now, with that law, now we're able to build not only 1,200 square feet of an ADU, but we are able to build up to 500 square feet additional to what has been allowed. If we go back to the slide.
Yeah, we'll go back there.
So another big improvement was that now multifamily structures are able to build up to 2 ADUs. That's also, again, trying to incentivize the number of units that you can build into the housing. For example, another big improvement was that we are able to also reduce the provision, well, the requirements imposing on owner occupant requirements, which means that now before in 2017, you had to live in the house in order to have an ADU. Now you're able to not get rid of that requirement, which is a huge improvement.
Right, Daniel, this is a couple things that I definitely want to highlight because I know in our pre-meeting, we discussed about this, but one of the key aspects about this is that a lot of our clients, and especially our real estate professionals that are out there, don't know that this legislation all has a time horizon, right? So it's really only between now, 2020 and 2025. So it's almost like we do have a window. We can hope that they're going to continue this, but realistically, there is a window of time for us to take advantage of this. Is that not correct?
That is absolutely correct, and you can be expecting it to go both ways. Either these things are going to, the laws are going to keep becoming more flexible because of the demand of housing, or it could go the other way. So definitely, this is a very great time to look at these opportunities.
Big opportunity to take advantage of. So we want to definitely get meeting. And now I'm going to bring up one of my favorite subjects, especially with this legislation, Daniel, is sitting here thinking about all the unpermitted square footage and ADUs that we've seen out there. I mean, let's face it, demand has always been there. Now it's an excellent opportunity for us to sit back and take advantage of this, right? So this will also allow us to get unpermitted square footage permitted through the new rules. Isn't that correct?
Absolutely, that is correct. And city officials, especially in Los Angeles, have been very advocating that because, like you mentioned, prior to 2016, there has been a lot of units that were not up to code. So now the cities are also facilitating the taking of these units into make them legal. I mean, and a good example of that is how like the most popular sort of way of ADU is the garage conversion,
Right,
know, and
right, exactly.
the
So,
benefit of the garage conversion is that also, there is this misconception, and I hate,
well,
I like to.
we're going to get into that. I'm going to stop you for a second. Hold on to that because we're going to get into that in just a minute. But I want to give one more point with regarding to the legislation aspects, which is really key, Daniel. It's no more city overlays. In other words, before, the cities could make up a lot of their rules, but now there's no more city overlays. Is that correct?
That's correct.
With all the legislation?
There's still ordinance
Oh.
per city, but they have to comply with what the state is regulating, basically.
Well, that's really what the game plan is if you understand the rules, and I will tell you, all that have joined today, we do have an accessory dweller unit handbook that was updated for 2020 that we're going to be sending out. So you definitely got to email us, let us know that you want one. We're going to make sure that everybody that's joining today is going to be able to get it, take advantage of that. So definitely get that. So let's go ahead and move on to getting to know your architect, and let's deal with the popularity, Daniel, because this is really what is going to be driving our audience today, is understanding how they can help their clients. Because really what comes down to is we don't know what we don't know, and there's a tremendous amount of demand that's out there that we just want to help them facilitate, at least understand what's out there. So let's take it away from this part.
Yes.
So let's go right into what you were.
So in a way, talking a little bit about the garage conversion is, the misconception, as I was going to say before, is that you have to replace parking. With a garage conversion, you do not have to replace parking. So that means that you don't have to add another parking for the ADU, and you just need to provide 2 spaces for the single family house, which that could be, the benefit of that is that they could be actually uncovered spaces or tandem parking, which is a great opportunity again.
Wow, that's incredible right there. With eliminating the parking requirements, I know that there's a lot of places that could take advantage. I know that there's some exceptions with the garage conversion, but realistically, we're talking about a brand new, a complete new facility that's independent. And I think I really wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit. And if maybe you can understand that this is an actual separate housing. It's got its own kitchen. It has its own bathroom. It could be a studio or it could have its own bedroom. But this is an individual isolated unit.
That is correct. That is correct. So, in addition to going a little bit back to what you said about parking, there is this also new ordinance that has new law in state, is that you're actually also able to, if it's not a garage conversion, if it's a ground up construction, but you're in proximity to a transit zone or a metro line, you're able to, if you're within a 1.5 mile radius, you're able to again eliminate the parking restrictions.
Wow, that's huge. So let's just I would look to, this is a good point to make a highlight of that. So Daniel, if your property, Daniel, if your subject property is within a 1.5 mile radius of any kind of transportation, so that's the Metrolink, it could be the trains, the buses, you can actually eliminate the parking requirement. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Wow. That's huge, especially for our audience out there, for those that are doing investors or are trying to add value to a listing. This is an excellent way to create value to help somebody capture that, especially for the demand that's going on for housing. So that's awesome, Daniel. That's a great point that we definitely want to highlight. So keep going.
Can we go back to the slides?
Yeah.
Again, so going back to the sort of the adaptive reuse component is that, you know, again, we're trying to address the housing and see what LA 2.0 is going to be with all these single family housing. And, you know, looking at the garage conversion as a just one alternative, but ground up as another alternative, and looking at, again, multi-generational housing. You know, people are moving back to the suburbs, so there's going to be this kind of a mix of families happening. So it's definitely a way of kind of going back to your next point of impact of the assets.
Right. Well, impacting the asset. So just think about a couple things that you just brought up, because obviously your experience with your company, and I want to make sure that we keep highlighting alternative design, which you own, you're the owner of that, is you're putting together plans that will enable our clients and your clients, real estate professionals, to deal with what they need to deal with. So if it's an open plan, whatever the different things, the needs of the client. So let's talk about this multi-generational housing first. I know it's second, but let's talk about that first. Multi-generational housing is something, it's because of what's going on right now. We see that more frequently. I know a lot of people like to use the term in-law quarters or granny quarters, but realistically, it's about extended families, right? Living in these ADUs and building them on their property. Is that correct? What you've been seeing?
Absolutely. I think that more than ever, people are coming back to where they're from, and you're seeing that all across. We also have a big limit on elderly care and housing. So it's combining those things and also designing to see, because design then plays a big role in understanding generations to basically curate a model for them, right? So talking a little bit about design is super important. What you mentioned about the open plan, right? Open plan, because you're actually very constrained with space. So making the space as big as possible to make sure that you're addressing every specific generation. It's something very, very interesting, and
well, I'll bring up a couple of examples that I know that we've encountered. So we have a couple of situations with the rising cost and also protection of their elderly, protection of their mom, their grandmother. They're building ADUs in the back of their properties because obviously the cost outweighs. I mean, if you think about it, the cost these days for elderly care is tremendous. And then the other aspect that we've seen is millennials really just stay to actually build wealth and help offset their own costs by creating another unit. But then we go back to the straight, investor, the family that's trying to create other income stream. So this is an excellent way to create income as a landlord and to create wealth that way. But also with the new legislation, this opens up the ability to be able to do that. And what have you seen with those?
Well, in terms of the sort of flexibility of the new legislations, definitely is going to impact how even ownership has become a point of discussion, right? With this new legislation, if you're able to sell the property as a different components when there is a statement that is going to be for affordable housing. So there is a lot of information that we need to navigate in order to really hit all these marks.
Right. I know there's a lot of complexities, and obviously we could probably have a panel or a webinar or webcast just on that issue that you just brought up. But let's talk about that a little bit, just briefly. So the lack of supply really impacts values, and of course we see values increasing because of availability. So if you are a real estate professional or investor and you're purchasing a property and it's going through the upgrading process, right now, because of the way the new legislation gives you the flexibility to create added value, therefore added profits by adding an ADU to your listing or to a new property that you just purchased, especially if you have a growing family. I mean, let's face it, the affordability, right? If you think about the affordability on purchasing a house, maybe you have 3 kids, 4 kids, or you have an in-law that's living with you and you can only afford a 2 bedroom, 1 bath, or a 3 bedroom, 1 bath. This is an excellent option for you to help grow your family. And a lot of times the vision of that's available, a lot of people don't realize that that's available to them. How many times have you run into that, Daniel, where you run into value add properties where you're sitting here looking at it?
Well, that's a really interesting point, Frank, because I think that now, even with the addition of the junior ADU, it's incentivizing to actually create, like beyond the 1,200 square feet, uh, 500 additionally square feet, right? So you can attach a junior ADU where, can have its private entrance, still attached to the meter of the single family house, but
Right.
addition to that, you have even more space for a 1,200 square feet that didn't exist before. So a total of 18 square feet, if required setbacks are met, I think starts to enable way more bulk of housing
Well,
available.
this is the thing about when we go back to the impact of the asset. So let's talk about the neighborhood, right? So,
Mhm.
because of my experience and my advocacy for housing, I understand all the different, you know, redlining issues that have gone on in the past. And if you look at some of the areas where we live, I mean, let's face it, a lot of the families still have the demand. So they just added onto their property without permits. And now's a good time for them to make it permitted so they can take advantage of that value. So you can use this time to get a professional like yourself. So have you run into that type of situation yourself in your experience, running into people that have unpermitted square footage and making
Yes, unfortunately, it has been more of a garage renovation because that was the first space that people start tapping into.
right, right,
Surprisingly, it's like, hey, we have to convert this garage into a livable space because we don't have any more space in the house, right? So it's transforming those spaces into legal spaces, which is now facilitated through these lack of parking rate restrictions.
right. And then you mentioned about multifamily, which is I think is an incredible impact because let's face it, our family business, we're a lot about multifamily commercial lending, and I actually started my career in commercial multifamily. So when we sit there and look at what is possible with an ADU, can you imagine? I mean, the fact that we can actually put an additional dwelling unit on the back end of 8 units. I mean, I think the rule that you mentioned in our pre-discussion is, from what I see in the legislation, it's 25% of the existing, correct?
That is correct, and up to two ADUs per
Right.
per.
So I think that's a tremendous value. So if you are an owner, an investor, and you have the space, you can actually take advantage of that. And how many of those properties right now? I mean, just I don't know how many are out there, but just think how many clients could use an additional 2 units and use that cash flow into what their NOI would be to create that value. That would be just tremendous, tremendous for a family that is trying to create more value, trying to create more income. And you see that as something that this is in the law now. So this is something that you could do 5 units plus to whatever units.
Yeah, I think that you bring a very interesting point because I have, from my experience, people are adding these units to rent them out, right? So to get some income from having this empty space in their backyard, you
Right.
know?
Right. So that's another way for people. So let's just talk about people that are on fixed income, right?
Mhm.
So if you have a borrower, or an owner of a property, and they are actually trying to maximize their retirement, they actually could do an improvement to their property by adding an ADU on the back end. And with these new laws, make it real simple for them to hire somebody like yourself to help explain and go through all the parameters with that specific city to generate more revenue. And this is a long-term play. This is not something this is a permanent part of your asset now. This is not something that you can pick up and move on. This is something that could be part of your team. And I'm sure you're running into those type of families all the time. I know we are.
That's correct.
Yeah, I think it's really good to think about those housing issues. Now, if we sit there and think about these things, so we're talking about a lot of the benefits, we talk about different specific parts. One of the key things that I know that we did mention was the amount of time. So let's go to the hurdles, Daniel, because this is something that I know our audience is thinking, wow, this is too good to be true. The cities have to comply with the state, and there's always that tug of war between the legislators going back and forth on the city requirements. I know a specific city that created their own outline, which now it's pretty much, mute. So let's just think about that. In our pre-discussion, we talked about what is the time that it's going to take for somebody to add to this, to add to their property, an ADU to their property.
So I think that it's very important to address, like the notion of time specifically with, tying it a little bit almost with what's happening in the city right now, even though we're in different times, things are taking a little longer. And one of the things that were not one of the essential businesses that did not close down was construction. So there's a lot of construction going on, right? So, time is still delaying, especially, because of the city or finding the right contractors. So it's important to have a team that is able to provide that.
Well, let's talk about that. So the state legislation is actually mandated. So the cities are mandated to approve within 60 days. I mean, that is the state mandate with this new legislation. But because of the COVID, which is one of our top three things that we put up there, is dealing with is that the cities are still experiencing delays because people working remote and because construction wasn't stopped. There is a high demand for projects going on, right?
That is correct.
That's what you're saying. So, so how does obviously the one of the other key hurdles that we were talking about was looking at the costs, right? So what are you experiencing? I mean, we know what we're seeing with construction projects as materials prices are increasing and whatnot. But what are different things that you've seen that have come together with those type of hurdles that people are really experiencing?
I think that a lot of it has to do with planning. I think it's a very crucial component in trying to understand these new laws. I mean, it's been what 6 months since these were implemented. So navigating the new code and the new laws, and also planning. Planning seems to be planning is crucial, I think, from the beginning. Understanding that enable you to save a lot of time and money, I think. And
that's definitely something that is important, and this is why I think your experience and that why our audience is definitely going to be able to take advantage of your experience and the things that we've been facing on the financial side of it. So, when we sit there and think about time that you've been running into, the normal time of a project, if everything was moving through its, let's just say, I mean, I don't know what the new normal, we keep saying what the new normal is, but realistically, before we would see projects between 5 to 8 months, kind of start to finish. So we can expect the delays if you're not planning. So this is why hiring somebody like yourself that has experience, or somebody that has experience, especially from the start to finish, because that's what you and your company provides assistance with, and that's start to finish. Is that correct?
That is correct. I think that the same way that planning and having the right team of contractors and builders it's crucial, I think, to navigate this new normal.
Right. Well, that also helps with material costs, because if they're dealing with delays, you can, systematically go through and make your acquisitions of materials and deal with those things that we come across. What about, like I'll just say when you are working with somebody, and we talk about the cities, because that's something that definitely kind of goes back into the issues. Are you finding situations where you actually have to educate the planner on what the new laws are and let them know, hey, you can't do that? Or are you feeling that type of situation with some of the projects that you've been working on?
Absolutely. I think that a lot of that has to do with utilities, the sort of confusion of whether 1 or 2 meters, like what are those, and that's all that information is provided at state level. So trying to convince a planner, it's easier once you provide the actual information that is found on the code. But I think that that's definitely everyone's right now getting educated on this in this subject matter.
Well, I think that's a really good point. So realistically, just like our family business, Capital Direct Funding, we sit back and try to provide solutions because we already can anticipate some of the problems. And I know by working with you, because we have worked with you personally, and this is why you're part of our team now, and we're really happy that you actually provide solutions. I mean, I know we had a couple of projects. We have one where we didn't anticipate a hillside ordinance, and you came out of the blue and go, guess what? I think we have a hillside ordinance. So your experience in dealing with those plans, and no matter how experienced you are, having somebody put a different perspective on it is really important. And the fact that you create solutions with your experience will definitely be a benefit to our audience. And I think that's a tremendous asset. And we really appreciate that, Daniel. I think we want to go into our next part of it, our next slide, because, it's like anything else. We want to make sure that we give time to address one of the foundation pieces of why this legislation came to play, and that is about fair housing. So, of course, I use the topic fair housing because of the lack of inventory, understanding why we live where we live, and I always try to do an advocacy plug of understanding, why it's so important for us to understand where we are, why we are, and all the zoning rules that were put into place to prohibit the things that now is actually permitted with this new legislation. So realistically, the ADU components and legislation came from a lot of advocates like myself and a lot of organizations that I partner with, and way more smarter people than myself with putting those rules together. So I definitely have to do consideration for those organizations and the support that we received from CAR. We also had a lot of different organization support and advocates. I know we had community builders, which is the 200. We had a lot of different nonprofit organizations that are trying to increase housing. And these are big components, especially the YIMBYs. I know those guys have been out here for the last 3 years building their one. So we just definitely want to make that point. But really what it comes down to, Daniel, is that we have a lack of inventory, right? I mean, we're probably about 3.5. I think what's the units cost? About 3 million units behind right now in the state of California alone, or whatever that count is. I know it's something astronomical, but this will actually help create an opportunity for families to create wealth through home ownership and also build, and then also look at investors taking advantage of people that are selling their properties as a value add. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide and talk about utilizing private money, because one of the hurdles that we did get from a lot of different customers is, let's face it, is financing. How do I pay for this new project? And really what we're trying to deal with is dealing with institutional lenders that have, if the requirements are a little bit tough. Sometimes we have people trying to start the project, which is a no, don't start your project until you get your financing. So that's another valid point. But really not be able to really start a project unless the finance is in place. And we know that there is renovation loans out there by institutional lenders that are out there that we gladly work with. We also know that there is cash out availability for some equity, but some don't have the access to capital, and that's why Capital Direct Funding has many different programs and availability of funds for these type of projects. Sometimes you might have somebody that might need our money for a short term to do this ADU improvement and then go back to institutional financing. So that way they are on the long term, they can kind of use us as a temporary bridge, which usually is the case. But I just really want to see, Daniel, have you run into situations where families were adding value because of distress situations, because maybe their family was too big, or or they had to create value to be able to sell the property? Have you ever run into anything like that? I know we have, but I was just curious if you run into any of those distress situations.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that when, from my experience, when I was working on fire rebuilds for the Halsey Fire, Malibu Halsey Fire, people were looking at ADUs as an alternative first to build their main residence, and the second one is basically because they assume that, they could move the couple that were to retire in the future will move to that unit and rent out the main house at that point.
Wow, that's a really good part. I didn't think about that. I mean, how many families have we, have been devastated by the fires and everything that have been going on? I mean, think about that, right? It's tremendous. And then, situation that they've been impacted with. But that's a really good point. You have families that might use this as an opportunity to, hey, we'll build the ADU and we'll live in the ADU in the back, and then we'll rent out the front house. That's another option. You know what? We're going through this webcast, and of course we've had situations like that from families coming to us with that. So right now we want to kind of get started and kind of lay down the groundwork for some Q&A for our audience, because obviously we want to make sure that we give a little bit of time. So we know that we've kind of gone through a lot of the different process of using capital, using private money, understanding what the popularity and the density. We're going to go to the Q&A sessions, but if there's any reference points that you as an audience see that we want to go back to the slide, we can. But I do have a couple of questions that came from some of our audience that pre-registered, and they kind of said, hey, I want to kind of know about this. So they kind of moved to the front of the line. So the first question that came up was, and we've talked about it a little bit, but what specifically is the minimum setback, Daniel, for an ADU? What is that?
So that's a great question, Frank. And usually on rear and side setbacks is 4 feet, and you have to be 10 feet away from the main residence.
Okay. So
an interesting twist to that is that if you have like an alleyway or basically an alleyway, you can reduce the setback to 0 and access the ADU through the back.
wow. So that's interesting. So I know there's a lot of properties in LA, and I know that we have one that we're working on where they do have a rear entrance. So you're saying that there's a 0 setback if you have a rear entrance point, right?
Correct. And especially if you use garage conversion, if a garage conversion that had no setbacks, that is basically leading to the alleyway, then you immediately have no setbacks in the back.
Wow. So I know a lot of properties in LA. I know a lot of properties in San Diego. I know a lot of properties up north that we've seen where this has actually been something that I didn't even think about that. That's actually a really good question. And thinking about those setbacks, so going back to it, so it's 4 feet from the back or the sides and 10 feet from the existing structure. So we want to make sure our audience has that. And then definitely too, we'll make sure we send this back out with the handbook with these questions, so that way everybody gets a chance. And for some of our audience, we are actually, we're going to actually go back and videotape you as a candidate, so that way we can go ahead and or not a candidate, excuse me, as part of our audience and really demonstrate the question, because we really want to make this a tool that you can use to help your clients. Again, this is about you and your client base and understanding the value that we're trying to create. So the next question is stick built versus prefab.
Oh, that's a great question. And that's something that I've been very lucky, because I was able to very early on understand prefab. That I started after moving from Berlin. I was able to work in a prefab company in Los Angeles. So my main understanding started with prefab.
Oh,
and so there's two different benefits, and there's a misconception that prefab it's a trailer home, which is not anymore. I mean, prefab has evolved dramatically in the last 5 years. It has been now, especially the use of steel, and has really empowered prefab, right? And one of the benefits, huge benefits, is associated with time, right? And let me explain that a little bit further. is that at this, because basically prefab is off-site construction, you are able to, go through the permitting process as well as the site construction while your unit is getting built in the factory. And those parallel allow you that, once the site is done and the building is done, you can just plug it into the site, and then there you go, you have it. So
Wow. That's
time
interesting.
is one of the biggest ones.
Time and versus stick built, and of course stick built, you have your choice. Obviously, you have your choice of how you want to design, and that's where the architect and whatnot put together. But still, there are trade-offs, and this is why every ADU is a little bit different. Same thing with the junior ADU, and this is why hiring a professional like yourself, and understanding a lender like ourselves, having that flexibility, you can take advantage of that, so that way we can make sure accommodate what your needs are. I have another question that came from the audience today. This is from Dean Singleton. The garage requirements for statewide or citywide. So I would first say that the garage conversion are really statewide, but you still need to talk to the city, right? You still need to verify with the city, but a garage conversion this is a statewide allowance now, right? Daniel, I just want to make sure
that's correct.
That we're answering that question. That's a good question, Dean. We want to make sure that you're clear. So garage conversions are 100% part of the new legislation, right, Daniel? That's what you've seen.
That is correct.
Most common, right? And then now let's talk about another question that came up was, what is the average cost for an ADU? Because of course everybody was, what's it going to cost me, right? Show me the money, right? What is it going to deal? What are you seeing?
So what I'm seeing is that, of course, I'm going to speak in a general sense, because prices of construction of materials have fluctuated so much, especially back 6 months ago with tariffs, with a lack also because
it'll be going away here pretty soon, so we won't make that play.
Right. But construction being in high demand, prices vary. So, but I still, have an understanding that a garage conversion can cost you from 65 to 80,000. And
that's what we've seen also as a lender, people coming to us looking for that type of thing. And this is an individual unit. So this is kitchen, bathroom. It could be a studio. It could be one, depending on the size, right? You've seen all different versions of that. And
correct.
We're dealing with a variance. And then the regular ADU cost?
Again, for like a small studio, 400 square feet, you can be looking at 135 to 150, and yeah. Like a lot of the fluctuation also depends on the utilities as we speak. I had a client who wanted to build an ADU in Ventura, but they were using septic, so right off the bat, they couldn't really build it because they had to increase the size of the septic, which is affecting as a result the utilities.
Well, that's an interesting point. So let's make that a highlight point, Daniel, for our audience, because you see, we're going over just generalities because obviously everybody's situation is specifically different. And I'm going to revert back to what you said originally was you need a plan, right? You need a plan so you know exactly what you're dealing with ahead of time. But let's think about that, right? Because utilities are out of the precursor of the cities. So if you have to dig up concrete, if you have to move power, I didn't even think about the septic. My goodness, you're right on the money. So those are issues that could definitely increase or substantially increase the costs if you don't have the right planning in place. So that's something that is really important. And I know I just got that. I did get a question, and I know it's one of my buddies, Edwin Acevedo. That's a great question. So this is why we just kind of brought up the example of the cost. So if you sit there and think about this, Edwin, and all our audience, is that the garage conversion we've seen from Daniel between 65 and 85,000, depending on utilities as a variance, and then ground up, you're saying between 135K to 150K, and again, that goes into the variances and whatnot. But the biggest impact is going to be where are the utilities and where are, what, and that goes back to the planning that you mentioned, which I think is a really good point for our audience. And that's a great question. So I want to expand on that. So Edwin, my fellow NAREP brother. So we're going to do shout out to NAREP Los Angeles. It's in the house. So thank you guys for supporting. I know Edwin is a huge real estate brokerage, and there's a tremendous amount of real estate professionals. And this is something that's important because, everybody wants to know, what's the cost. And if you're an investor, so you're going to sit there and think about what is this? So I know a lot of people have pre-planned calculations that they do, but you've run into some serious issues with regards to utilities, right, Daniel?
That is correct. Especially, I think that what you mentioned about the planning is as early on as you're able to identify the constraints of the site, you're able to address it and come up with a more precise number at the end of the day.
Well, I got another question. This came in from I think it's Bob Perry. I think I got that right. So let's talk about. He wants to know: will you be discussing property tax reassessment when adding an ADU? So I know a little bit about that. So I can share with you that this is in essence an improvement to your property. So when you're pulling permits, and Daniel, please interject. When you're pulling permits and you're laying out what the total cost is, that is in essence the assessment that the city is going to be doing, is the actual cost on what you're proposing. Is that not correct, Daniel, on what you're seeing on the assessment?
From my understanding, that is correct.
So let's just use, and that portion will be reassessed. So, I know the standard is a 1% or a 1.25%, but you definitely want to make sure, again, while you're planning, you are forecasting, because you see, and I'll use the reference point because I know that I've seen different professionals highlight the use of PACE loans to do these. And I will tell you, it's my opinion to not put a family into a PACE loan because of the impact to the property taxes and all the other things that go on with the PACE loan. And that's a separate discussion all by itself. But what I will tell you is that part of the improvement would be reassessed, no different than in addition to the property if you do 400 or 500 square feet over the counter, or if you do that and an ADU. That would be 1% or 1.25% of the actual cost. And that's a great question by Bob. So thank you, Bob, for bringing that up. I have a couple more questions. And again, we'll definitely bring up issues with regards to most cities have a 2-car requirement. So the third car can be an ADU conversion, whatnot. I think, and this is from Dean, I think we kind of addressed that, but I think we should circle back to that. Daniel, can you interject on the actual parking requirements? I think we did that with the legislation.
Yes. So basically, as long as you provide, well, if it's a garage conversion, you're not required to provide parking. And again, if it's within the 1.5-minute radius to a transport-oriented, well, basically
right. That was a great point. I didn't even think about that, but that's excellent.
And the last one will be like, as long as you have for the garage conversion or within that zone, you still need to provide the two parking spots for that single family house, but that could be an uncovered space.
Basically. It could be an uncovered space. So to clearly specific that, because we did go into that, I know we had a lot of questions regarding parking because that's always been an issue, especially with the previous legislation, because I know city overlays. So you are eliminating city overlays, and that was one of the ways that cities had control with the parking requirement. So we've really addressed that with the new laws, addressing the requirements that cities can't put overlays. They can't put parking requirements, especially if you're within a 1.5-mile radius, right? And you also have to provide two, so that can be uncovered. So if you have a long lot with a garage, I think in one of our pictures that we put in our slideshow,
right, you're able,
the garage in the back that was converted, and you have a line, those you could use that as an uncovered parking requirement to satisfy that. Is that correct?
That's correct. As long as it meets the zoning setbacks. But another aspect about parking, so we touched already on the mile from public transit. If it's also part of an architectural or historical significant district, you also might be able to get rid of the parking requirement, which is also a great thing. And then if there is an opportunity for on-street parking as a permit, it's also you're able to get rid of the parking requirements.
Oh, wow. So I know there's some cities that definitely utilize the
Free
parking
parking.
permit requirements. I won't mention any of them, but their initials are Pasadena. So I know that we have a lot of there are cities out there that are mandating that. So that's an interesting aspect. So if you have a
Mhm.
parking permit requirement, that is something that we can do. So I want to, there's a couple of questions that I'm going to kind of grab real quick. So one question is, and we kind of addressed it, it's a little bit difficult. So one of the good questions, this is from Stephanie. She's asking about how much per square feet to build an ADU. So I guess my first answer, and I'll let you interject, Daniel, is it's really tough because of the utilities and all the things that are implied, because you really, that's where the planning goes into place. But realistically, if it's a 400 square foot, you already kind of gave an estimate between 135,000 and 150. So if you kind of back into that, it kind of gives you the equation of what the cost per square footage is. But it is a moving ball. So we do know that that is something that can go up and can go down. But realistically, like you mentioned, what about the materials, right, Daniel?
At material and planning, as early as the whole picture, you're able to assess and get the value, the price tag faster too.
So the planning and realistically, the planning sooner than later. So what would be a pre-planning window, Daniel, that you would prefer to work with with somebody, if you're just starting out with them from the beginning? Let's just go from the first phone call or email request inquiry. How much time do you think is a good window for them to kind of use as a gauge?
I think that from the time that the starting meeting up to like it's important to see the site, and being able to contact um, the different utility companies to basically get an idea. It's also important to see the structure if you're doing a adaptive reuse. What's the condition of the concrete? Do you have to basically because a lot of these conversions, you have to look at at adding a lot of the times seal the parking, sorry, the garage units, which is usually one of the biggest constraints, right? You have to seal it, you have to sometimes remove concrete and adapting it to transform into an ADU. So
Well, I know there's a lot of wonderful questions, and I'm just going to take this time to thank our audience. So here's where we're at. So we did not talk about two-story additions or over the garage additions, which is becoming very popular also, that we're seeing.
correct.
And we're seeing, like just what you said, adaptive reuse, the junior, the JDU, the junior ADU, right? Adding to the structure. We showed that in our picture. So Jacob actually asked, what is the type of funding programs that Capital Direct Funding offers? So we have a number of programs that we have available, but 2 or 3 of the most popular are, we do have an interest-only program where we include all the payments, so there's no payments from start to finish from our funding. So from the project, and those are projects that are usually designed to be less than a year or less than 6 months. So that is one of our most popular right now, especially in the times that we're in, where somebody could actually borrow the money, get all the planning, get everything done from start to finish, and not have any payments, and go to our institutional brothers and sisters out there and refinance once it's completed. They get the certificate of occupancy, and then do that, and then hopefully that stays within the window of time. So we definitely want that. And also for our real estate managers, real estate broker owners, and professionals, we want to let you know and thank you for participating. And maybe if you're a real estate professional and you want to let your broker owner know that Daniel and myself are available for team meetings, where we could do a Zoom meeting specific to your team, specific to situations that you have. So obviously we need to do some pre-planning and take a look at some of the properties that you want us to talk about. And I'm going to put Daniel's contact information here in a minute, and mine, but we are also available for one-on-one meetings. Daniel as an individual, us together, him as an individual by himself, me by myself. But we're here to help you take care of your clients and create value, and understand that this is a tremendous opportunity. And this is something that we really appreciate you being here, because this is something that you can't miss. This needs to be part of your business. This is something that, there's a lack of, every day you're looking on MLS to find out how many properties are available and all the things that are going on there. So let's go ahead and put the contact information for everybody to grab close to that. Juan, I want to thank our team. First, Daniel Aguilar, I want to thank him, and he'll have his closing moments here. And I want to thank our team, Juan Williams and Sandra and Francisco and everybody here at Capital Direct Funding. Go ahead, Daniel, with your closing remarks on our webinar.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be talking to everyone here. And again, Alternative Design is a company that I've been sort of establishing slowly, and I'm very passionate about the future of LA, especially with a huge housing demands. And I'm also very interested on prototyping. So there's something, if you guys want to keep in touch, please do so. My company's in the process of prototyping a ADU on wheels. That's something that if you guys are interested, please feel free to reach out. We're in the process of doing that. It's taking quite a bit of time, but yes, thank you again. And I'll leave my LinkedIn information on the chat.
Right. Well, we're gonna definitely make sure everybody gets the input. Again, we have our handbook that we're going to be sending out to everybody. Again, I want to thank again all of our team, all of our audience that pre-registered. We really appreciate all the questions that you're asking. Our family business is only able to grow because of you working with us and you referring us and allowing us to help you. Our family business, we deal with a lot of different crisis situations, and we deal with situations like this. So this is something that we're definitely going to be expanding on. We have a wonderful team of professionals that help our family and deal with different situations. And Daniel is part of our umbrella of team members that work with us. And I think it's just something that we need to do on the regular. So expect more of these webcasts. We are definitely going to expand on this because we know this is something that is going to continuously be evolving because of the demand. And I think having professionals like Daniel on here and those questions from your audience really helps. I hope we were able to create value to you today. We know that our team put a lot of time and effort in making sure we gave you things that were going to help you put the pedal to the metal right now, not months from now, right now. So we're available for you. So please don't hesitate to contact us. You can send your email through the any more questions. We're going to follow up with all the questions that were answered, that were requested, and we'll go ahead and address those offline. But we want to say thank you again, Daniel, for appreciating. We appreciate everybody. So thank you so much and have a wonderful day.
Of course, thank you.